Hi, I'm Megan McGuire Steele. I own the public relations and strategy agency McGuire Steele. I graduated from WashU with a BFA in painting and minors in business and art history. And today I'm really happy to welcome Allison Samek, who has over 20 years of retail management experience, focusing on strategy, merchandising, and operations. She's worked for a variety of companies, from Fortune 100 companies to owner-operated apparel stores, each time with a focus on streamlining operations and increasing profitability while maintaining the integrity of the brands for whom she worked. Allison started her career in retail consulting, and then also worked at eBay as a marketing manager for clothing, shoes, and accessories. She also went to Stanford for business school, and then following eBay, she moved into working for Ron Herman and then Fred Segal. At Fred Segal, she served as managing director of operations, buying, marketing, and finance, eventually overseeing all operations of the company in 2013. In 2016, she transitioned to the role of CEO at Fred Segal and also guided that company through a multitude of expansion phases, including the sale of the company in 2019, which we'll talk about much more in depth. So Allison, welcome. My intro is a little choppy, but we're gonna revert back and do a deep dive of each of those stages.
Hi.
So I guess tell me a little bit about when you first graduated from WashU. Tell me what your degree was in, and then your first job out of WashU was at Deloitte prior to going to Stanford for your MBA. So tell me a little bit about that first trajectory from graduation to consulting to deciding to go to business school.
So I was one of those few people who knew really early on, probably in middle school, that I wanted to do the business side of retail. And when I got to WashU, I was an econ major, so I have a Bachelor of Arts in econ, but I have a minor in the business school, and I took classes in the fashion design program. So I took 2D and 3D, history of costume, history of fashion design, because I loved that you could take classes in every school, which I thought was amazing. And so I knew I wanted to go do something on the business side of retail. And I interviewed, at the time, there was a company called Famous Bar, which was part of the May company, which was based in St. Louis. And I was interviewing for buying jobs and consulting jobs. And the reason I picked Deloitte was, at the time, that it was a business analyst role, and I was allowed to only focus on retail clients, so the consumer business clients, which I thought would be a nice way to kind of see the industry. So I moved to Chicago right after graduation, had a couple roommates up there, and started that summer working at Deloitte, and spent 3 years as an analyst and then associate consultant, working on multiple consumer business clients. So most of those clients are much larger. I worked for Sears, for Kmart, for Spalding Sporting Goods, clients like that, who we were working on strategic merchandising and operations projects.
And just to back up also, where did you grow up? Where are you from originally?
Yeah, so I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. I was the first person from my high school ever to go to WashU, or at least 10 or 15 years each way. Yeah. And I knew I didn't want to stay in Phoenix. It was a great place to grow up, but not where I wanted to be. And moved to St. Louis for college, loved it. Have nothing but like amazing memories of WashU. So
amazing. I think I also was like the only person from my high school to go to WashU too. I went to all girls Catholic prep school on the main line outside of Philadelphia. So it's different, but yeah, they were like, okay, WashU.
Is that in DC or is that exactly?
So, and then basically working at Deloitte and having the opportunity to understand the business consulting side of things, already knowing that you had an interest in that. You went to Stanford for business school. How did you choose that program? Obviously, it's an excellent program. But how did you sort of choose that, as well as the timing? And then what sort of, while you were at Stanford, I know you typically do like summer associate or like positions, intern positions. So what were those? And then how did that lead into like your next job at eBay, more on the sort of corporate side of things?
Yeah, I can walk through that. So one of the things about consulting that I always tell, for those of you who are on the call who are in school now or about to graduate, consulting is an amazing career path for people who really want exposure to all things business. You will get thrown into situations that are so far above like what somebody maybe typically right out of undergrad gets to experience. So I thought that was great. At the same time, you work your butt off. I mean, I did all-nighters all the time. I was traveling, which sounds much more glamorous than it was. And it was really a ton of work, but it was great exposure. And it taught me Excel, it taught me presentation skills, it taught me database skills. I learned, it was a great all around experience to learning. And it honestly taught me my work ethic. I really do give, and there, my friend Susan, I saw on the list from Deloitte. So hi, Susan. I have friends that I keep in touch with to this day from there. My bridesmaids at my wedding were from Deloitte. We all went through a shared experience together.
I feel like that was kind of like the boot camp.
It was boot camp. It was totally boot camp. And it was a 3-year program, and they sort of booted you out. They said, you have to go get an MBA and then you can come back, and we'll sponsor your MBA if you come back and work for us. And that was my plan. So I picked Stanford because in 1990, I guess this would have been 1990. Well, it would have been 2000 when I was applying in 99. And it was the very beginnings of like the major .com boom. And that it was all happening out in Palo Alto. And I didn't necessarily want to go into .com, but that's kind of where everything was going on right then. And so when I got in, it was a pretty easy decision. It's also a really small school relative to other business schools. And I liked that it was really intimate. So went out there, I was there for 2000 to 2002. And my internship while I was there, I worked in New York for L'Oreal, which was it was brand management, very traditional brand management. I loved that internship. I really, really enjoyed being in New York. And I thought I was going to return to it. So I went back to school second year, and in my mind said, oh, I'm going to go back and take the job at L'Oreal. I was lucky enough to get an offer. And then about 6 weeks into school, I met my husband. So he was a first year, I was a second year, and that sort of shifted the plans because we were goo goo gaga in love, and there was no way in heck I was like moving back to New York. So he had another year at Stanford. So so I ended up taking a job. I wanted to stay in the Bay Area, and I took a job. Well, I don't know if that was where you wanted to go next, but that kind of covers through Stanford.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
And I took a job at eBay, and this was in the time. This was again in 2002. So eBay was hugely growth company, kind of a brand. It was post IPO, but it was still like a hugely hot, super cool company at the time. Mm-hmm. And even though I didn't consider myself a tech person at all, and I really wanted to get into fashion, I felt like I couldn't turn that opportunity down. And I actually got hired to do collectibles, which was like trading cards and toys and things like that. And within a couple of weeks of being in there, I just kind of navigated myself to the people who were running the clothing, shoes, and accessories category, and went up to them and self-advocated and said, listen, I know I'm hired to do collectibles, but I actually really want to be on clothing, shoes, and accessories. If you ever have an opening, I will do work for you guys. And pretty soon afterwards, I was able to shift into that group.
Well, by the way, you could use your collectibles knowledge now for NFTs, which are all the rage.
I just learned what those were.
Non-fungible assets.
Really I'm a little behind on that, but I learned.
World, but see, everything's connected. So you advocated for yourself, and you made your way into fashion at eBay.
Right.
And
it's a little different there, right? Because they don't actually own product.
Yes.
But we have buyers and sellers, and so on the seller side, we were going to trade shows and trying to get more people to sell on eBay. Mm-hmm. And on the buy side, we were doing marketing to show people that you can actually get really cool new clothing on eBay as well. That's not just, at the time, it was mostly people thought it was vintage, and it wasn't. There was really cool things to find on there too.
Right. And then, so how did you make the transition from eBay to Ron Herman?
One last eBay interesting thing. So at the time, there were fake handbags flying all over the place on eBay, fake product. And so we put together an initiative to figure out, like, how do we stop this? And so that's where I spent about 1.5 years of my time working on the handbag category, figuring out how to get like trust and safety involved. So that was a pretty cool project. And then,
I mean, that's sort of so many of the things that you're mentioning, I feel like connect forward to things that are really big topics in the fashion industry right now with, you know, so many sites like The Real Real, Rebag, Depop, all trending,
Crazy.
and,
Yep.
you know, authentication, and how now the next phase of that, or how our brand's going to forge like direct partnerships with resale sites and what that looks like. So it's interesting to have that background, because all of these sort of topics, like they come back in new forms and iterations. So I think that would
In
be
some ways,
interesting.
eBay was sort of ahead of the time when you
Yeah.
think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So then you moved on to Ron Herman. How did that come about? And what were some of the unique successes or challenges of that position? And then we'll sort of dive into how that led into Fred Segal as well.
So, you know, I think a lot of people in life think that everything is earned, and you know how your jobs kind of go, oh, I did this and then this. I mean, there's a lot of luck involved too. And I'll talk about that later when I moved to Fred Segal, but I wanted to move down to LA. I was commuting for over a year. We were living in LA, but I was commuting to work up in the Bay Area. I was used to traveling from consulting, so that wasn't a huge problem. But I wanted to move to LA. And my second cousin was a lawyer for the apparel industry. And I said to him, I was like, oh, do you know anything, anybody hiring, anybody looking, anybody you can connect me with? He's like, I really don't, but my boss is getting honored at a charity dinner, and you know, he represents tons of apparel people too. You should buy a ticket and go. So my husband and I bought a ticket to go to this charity dinner, and we had random place cards we got randomly assigned. And I ended up sitting next to this guy, Ron Herman. And I was talking to him, and I said, you know, I work for eBay. And he said, really, do you know websites? And I was like, well, kind of. I mean, I work for a website.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, you know, this is in 2004. And he said, oh, I have this retail company and I want to start a website. Do you want to come start my website for me? And I went in the next day and interviewed for him. And we didn't know anything. We didn't know what we were doing at all. And I said, yeah, I'd love to. So I quit my job and moved to LA and started a website for Ron Herman. And I did that for about a year until I went on maternity leave with my first son. And when I came back, he had shifted the role a little bit and had moved me to the corporate office and said, will you kind of start helping with operations instead? Yeah. And then 11 years later, I was running operations for the business. I stayed for almost 12 years.
Okay. And then how did you then make the transition, and maybe explain the relationship between Ron Herman and Fred Segal for people who, many of whom may know, but for those who don't, the adjacency and connection of those businesses and how you made the transition into Fred Segal officially.
So you can think of Fred Segal as sort of a mall. It's the real estate. And there are shops within the brand Fred Segal. There were a couple flagship locations, one on Melrose Avenue and one in Santa Monica for 30, 40 years. And Ron Herman was the largest store in the Melrose Center. And Ron Herman also had other stores in LA and in Vegas. So we had 8 stores, and it was one of the Fred Segal stores. Ron Herman and Fred Segal were related, distantly related too. But it wasn't a close relationship. So, so anyway, the building said Fred Segal, there were 2 Fred Segal centers, and then Ron Herman was a store within it. And then we were growing other stores as well. So that's sort of how I was there. And then after 11 years, as I'm sure it happens to a lot of people on this call, I had 2 kids at the time, and priorities were changing. My kids were maybe like 7 and 10 at the time, maybe a little younger, 6 and 9. And I thought I wanted to kind of take some time off and maybe take 6 months off, take a year off and see what was going on. I wanted to start my own business. I thought maybe I would do my own thing. And I left in May of 2016. And I took about 6 weeks off, and I was at the beach one day in July, early July. And I ran into a friend of mine from business school, and I hadn't seen him in maybe 6 months. I said, oh, how's it going? And somebody said the pings are distracting, and I feel like those might be mine. I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
Lady. You're a busy
my
lady.
Emails coming in. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Keep going.
I'm going. So anyway, I was at the beach and I ran into a friend. I said, how's it going? He goes, oh, things are pretty good. I heard you laughed. I said, I did. He goes, oh my gosh, the private equity firm I work for, we just bought Fred Segal. We own Fred Segal. I said, oh, I knew, because I'd obviously read about it and I knew people who were there. And he said, would you ever do some consulting work for us? And I said, honestly, I need a break. Like, I'm not really interested in that. And about a week later, he called me back and said, come on, I just need you to like look at the model, just do a little bit of work for me and just tell me if it's okay. I said, you don't have to pay me. I'm happy to do it for you. And that turned into like another conversation. And by November, they were like, why don't you come on board as CEO? So my like big break that I wanted lasted about 6 weeks. And I ended up coming back for like a full-time all-in job, like jumping in. So
I feel like that's the way it happened.
And that was not my intention. I was done. I was like, I'm going to take a break for a little while and like focus on maybe staying home with the kids a little bit or starting my own thing. And then, 6 months later, I was like full-time working. Yeah.
So this is basically by like 2017, you're in it again.
Yeah. November 2016, I started like
in 2016. Yeah. So really like May 2000, by June, you were June, July, or end of summer, you're like back in it again.
Back in it. Like,
okay.
I mean, I eased back in, but I mean, when they first started talking to me, there was no amount of money they could have paid me. I was like, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in going back to work. But honestly, like, as I started looking at the business and what they wanted to accomplish, it just seemed really interesting. And I thought it was a good match for what my background was.
Yeah. So you start in 2016 and basically, to the extent that you can discuss like in broad strokes, but I always think when a CEO is hired, it's sort of like there's only a few options of what they're kind of tasked with, which is, are they coming into, is the business healthy and in good position? Or are you coming in to sort of stay the course because somebody retired, or it's just a sort of natural changing of the guard? Or are you coming in to really overhaul things, turn the business around, clean house, like what it essentially, were you being tasked with at that time? What kind of was the health of the business that you were walking into? And at that time, had they already made the determination of, preparing the business for the next sale, which occurred in 2019?
So it was the latter. It was very clearly defined to me that, so the Segal family had sold the Fred Segal licensed name to this private equity firm. There was a transaction before, but basically the private equity firm owned the international rights to the IP. And the Segal family stepped off the business in 2014. He was very old, and the Segal family supported this decision and sold the IP. And it was very clear that my only job was to grow the business and sell the business and make this a profitable investment for the private equity firm. So that was my goal. And obviously preserve the brand value, which would help with the transaction. But it was to grow and get them out in 2 years. So it was a 2-year job. I was told, like, I'll be there 2 years, grow it, sell it, and be done.
So how did it go? I mean, the sale happened. So
it took us 2 years and 3 months, which I think is pretty good. We grew the brand like crazy. We opened up a new flagship store. The one in Santa Monica, the really large one, which is about 50,000 square feet, was the underlying property had been sold. So they closed the business down. It was doing great, but they needed the real estate. And we opened up a new flagship store on Sunset,
which I love and go to every time I'm in LA.
Thank you.
Yes.
We opened up international stores with licensed partners. Varied success on some of those because, just different markets have different kinds of opportunities. Some have done really well. We have an airport store. We did a bunch of licensing deals and set the company up for growth. We opened up a website. We opened up our Instagram. We didn't have any of this. This was all nascent. Remember, Fred Segal was more like a landlord than a business. What it was is an incredible curator of California cool for 60 years. Yeah. And so I was really lucky because I had this amazing base to start with. I mean, it's a beautiful brand that had so many legs. And I had a really good partner. The president for that time was a really good licensing person. And we were able to grow it pretty quickly. So a lot of work, but it went well.
And then now, so I guess it's been, you said a year, a little over a year. And so once the sale occurred, how has your role transitioned and what was that process like? Because it's like, there's this enormous push to increase profitability and get the company ready for sale or for it to be appealing to potential, companies that would buy it. and then executing that transaction. And then there's the transition process. And, to some CEOs, it's like they have a set amount of time that they stay on board for that transition, and then they're on to the next project. And that's built into the framework of their, there can be a bonus structure, compensation, or things like that. But I guess for you in this specific instance, what was that process like after you then, achieved the sale?
I was supposed to leave. So the plan was is that we'd sell, it'll be 2 years at the end of this month. So in 2 weeks from now, it'll be 2 years. And I was just talking to the new owner today, actually. And he was like, I wasn't supposed to like you. Like, you were supposed to leave in a month. And honestly, he didn't really like me when we first started. Like, I think he wanted to do his own thing. Yeah. I had kind of been running it and had my own perspective. And we did clash heads a little bit at the beginning. And I said to him, I'm like, I'm happy to step off this business. Like, it's yours now. I'm going to move on. Yeah. And we just kept on saying, well, we'll give it like a little time. And 2 years later, like, we work really well together. And he definitely has a different strategy than I had. He owns a global licensing firm. So it was a really good match. Yeah. He's really passionate about the business, and it's completely different working for an individual and agency than it is working for a private equity firm. Mm-hmm. And so there's another good experience for me, like just completely different experiences. But yeah, in general, when companies are sold, like the hired gun CEO, which is what I was, usually goes with them. And that was the plan. I was not looking to stay. So it just happened that we really liked each other, and we kept the party going.
You're still there, and you're continuing on. And are there any things that you have in the works that you can talk about in terms of what you're excited about next? And or one of the questions that came up was, being in retail, how did you address the pandemic, and what were the challenges of that? Because, everybody, I feel like we all went into 2020, in the fashion industry with big plans. And then, that very quickly shifted. And I know with my own clients, it was very much about, I think for me, like sort of getting them to sort of settle and focus and recommit and stay the course, and like move away from the sort of panic of what was transpiring and focus on the potential solutions, business pivots, opportunities, and programs that could be created to meet these new needs and changing environment.
I mean, the pandemic took us to our knees. Like, it was really bad. In LA, we were under stay-at-home orders. So first of all, we were closed for 4 months, almost 4 months. Our stores were completely closed. Yeah. And then when we opened, we were under order to stay home, except the store had to be open. So that was even actually like the worst of both worlds, because we actually had to like operate a store and have the expense of having employees running a store we would get 5 people a day. In a store, we used to get 500. So, I mean, it was like a ghost town for months. I mean, that was like August, September. October was a little bit better. But then just trying to figure out planning for this year has been hard to do, because you just don't know. We had a second wave. What we did see is that our store out in Malibu is up over last year. Like, people have been leaving the city to go. I think in New York, they probably went to the Hamptons. In LA, they go to Malibu.
LA got a little bit of Aspen. It depends on if you're, more heavily involved in the art world or the fashion.
So our Malibu store has been bananas. Like, it's been going great. And our Sunset store is way down, but it's trending up. So that's good. And so for us, it was like, how do we minimize our risk, minimize our exposure, and get through this? One of the most important ways, and I talk about this all the time, is partnering with the landlord. And the first few months, we got no help. It was basically like, your rent is overdue, tough. And I think what happened is, as the pandemic went on, most of the landlords in LA really recognized that was not a tenable solution for anybody. Like, it would be impossible. It would have been impossible for us to pay, full rent on a huge space being closed for an extended amount of time. Yeah. And our landlord came to the table and worked out a plan with us where we can grow back over the next couple of years to where we were. I don't think it'll take a couple of years, but that partnership has been instrumental. We got really lean on all of our operations. We were very prudent. We did not have to furlough. We actually were a recipient of the PPP program, and it allowed us to keep all of our employees, including our store employees. So that was really helpful. When we went into the second lockdown, we minimized the store staff a little bit, but we
Mhm.
mostly were able to ask people who wanted to leave. There were a couple
Yeah.
people who wanted to take some time off.
Yeah.
Um,
And
it's been rough.
how did you handle, like as new collection? So, the seasons continue. How did you work with your buying team and how did you handle like buying for the upcoming season, and what sort of changes did you make in your buying strategy, or how did you alter your partnerships with brands
Yeah.
with, the landscape changing so much?
Well, one of the interesting things about Fred Segal is we're a collection of shop in shops.
Hmm.
So we are 100% consignment shops. So
Okay.
all of our brands are on consignment in the store. And for those of you who are in school and maybe don't know, that means that we don't actually own the inventory. We pay for the inventory when it sells.
Yeah.
And so that is honestly probably the number one thing that saved us, because we
Yeah.
didn't have a huge payables to pay off during a period of time with no sales coming in. What that meant though is that it really put pressure on our partners who
Yeah.
handle the product, because they also had no sales coming in and they had factors and they had receivables that they had to pay. So they had payables. I'm sorry, they had payables they had to pay. So it was a partnership. I mean, we worked with people as best we could. We pay really quickly. So the second thing sold, we'd pay within a week or two. And now as we look forward, we know that it's hard for people to produce extra inventory for us.
Mhm.
So it's a struggle, but we're always finding brands to work with. There are so many good brands out there. And we're looking for diversification in brands. We want female brands from people of color. We try to support new designers. And so that's something we spent a lot of time this year while we had some space to breathe on that,
Mhm.
to look at like our portfolio of designers.
Yeah. I'm gonna go to, let's see, a question. So one of the questions is Jessica Jackson, class of 04, VP of retail at Eberge. Do you have advice for someone who may want to pivot from corporate retail into consulting when they don't have any formal consulting experience?
I think, and I'm not the expert on this, but I actually think that's really helpful for consulting, because they need industry experts. So especially if you find a firm that specializes by industry rather than by practice line. So instead of going to like a strategy firm or a operational firm, going to one that specializes, like Deloitte was one at the time that specialized by industry. So many of the people in the CPG practice had deep industry experience. I know there's a firm called Kurt Salmon Associates that's all retail based, and almost everybody from there has a retail background. So I think that's actually a career path that quite a few people do.
Okay. Another question was regarding sustainability and what sort of steps Fred Segal is taking towards sustainability and circularity. I think, yeah, that's been challenging amidst the pandemic as well. Although it depends on what area of the market you're in, but so specific to Fred Segal, how are you guys sort of thinking through that?
Yeah. So we create a small private label line that we want to expand and make much bigger. One of our focuses for our private label line was to be completely sustainable. Because it's new, we're working with small minimums. And when you added the minimums on plus coronavirus, which meant delays in shipping, delays in production, and a general hot mess, it was really tough to do that. But it is something that as we grow this private label, we want to do sustainability. I can't go on camera and say we're going to be 100% sustainable in 12 months, but the goal is to move that line towards sustainability.
Okay.
And we have shifted all of our bags and boxes are recyclable. Like we over the last couple of years, we've shifted towards that.
Yeah. And also I know, like, I don't know if you're still carrying this brand, but Atelier and Repairs.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So we have
amazing. Like there's some brands that you carry that incorporate a lot of upcycling and use
I should have mentioned that.
And he's so great if you guys don't already know who he is. But.
We carry quite a bit of Ateliers. We have a shop and shop with him. We're opening a shop and shop with him in Vegas as well. And it's all upcycled, sustainable materials. And we have quite a significant vintage business. So, and vintage t-shirts with a brand called Made Worn. So a lot of vintage.
Okay. I'm just looking through some of the other questions.
Oh, I see one. Here, I can answer one.
Okay.
Somebody said, do you have any advice for students trying to go down a similar career path on the business side of retail? So listen, I would say like, if it doesn't happen for you right when you graduate, don't panic. Like there's a lot of ways into it. And business school is a great equalizer. People come from everything, kind of get mishmashed together and then spit out into different industries. So that is one good way to get into the business side of retail, was to go to business school. I actually thought business school was a great equalizer for people who didn't have a background in it. And I would say with retail, any brand, any company or brand you can get into that touches a consumer is helpful. So I don't think you need to work for a apparel retailer necessarily, but if you can get into any company that has like a D2C or some type of touching the consumer basis, I think you can spin into the world of retail.
And then you had also, another question when I was skimming through is that, you had talked about a big part of your choice of business school was really to access the network that program offered. And so one of the questions was about mentors, internships, but I also think, because the fashion industry overall is very relationship driven, and I could map, my career points or my best clients or new client referrals. To me, the best clients are ones that are referred by existing clients and that sort of thing. So I guess maybe for you, are there key mentors or key contacts that are your peers that really sort of like led the way forward, that came out of either Stanford or other experiences that you felt were pivotal?
Yeah. So my Stanford experience and network is by far the strongest one I have. And I say that not with any disrespect to WashU. It's just my friends from WashU are in all sorts of careers. I have friends that are doctors. I have friends that are lawyers. And so I still keep in touch with lots of my WashU friends. It's just for my career, not as many of them are in my industry.
Although there's a lot of fashion lawyers from WashU, because we're going to do another panel about fashion law, and 3 of them, one is in-house legal counsel for Chanel, one is in-house legal counsel at Calvin Klein, and another is a partner at Frankfurt Klein itself, who does Bureau Batak and Christian Siriano and whatever. So we will have.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, when I think of like my immediate network of friends, and things like that. So when I look at my MBA network, quite a few of them did go into consumer businesses. But what I found was really helpful, and this does happen from WashU, of course, too, and of course from any graduate school, is the connections. So it's like, oh, you should talk to my friend of a friend of a friend. And what I will say, and like shout out, I also wanted to say, like, there are a few people on this call like that I saw had responded, my friend Mel and Becky and Jamie and Jason and Sherrod. Like, these are people I haven't seen in years and years, but I know, like, if I picked up the phone and talked to them, I would do anything to help them. I will network them. I will connect them to anybody, because who you are as a person when you're in undergrad or grad school, it matters. And if you're, somebody who people remember fondly as, oh, that person was really bright, that person was really kind, it stays with you. So, and I've felt that way. My PR company right now, I've probably sent them 5 new clients because they do a really good job for us. Yeah. And I'm happy to like refer on.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just going to see if there's, let's see. Open question. Sorry. Okay, we answered that. Okay, so Shelby, who's on the call, she has, or on the webinar, has a brand called Wear to Wall, which came out of her fine art studio practice. She was a printmaker at WashU, BFA in printmaking. And then in recent years has launched Wear to Wall, which is sort of like made to order and also one of a kind pieces. And she's asking, what your thoughts are on that made to order business model. And I think, we can talk about like a lot of brands do, which is related but different, like drop shipping, or, don't produce until orders actually are on the direct to consumer business model are made. But what has been your experience, I guess, on the retail to brand side of brands that operate in that more limited capacity, and what sort of scope do you see for that?
Well, I do think that personalization and customization is here to stay. I think that people demand that and they want that. So I think that that's a really interesting business idea. And I think that if you can figure out a way to do that in a profitable way, I think it's a great idea, because I do think that that is something, when you look at the Amazons of the world, like you can't even get on Amazon without them knowing exactly what you want already, right? So people are used to shopping exactly what they want. And I think that personalization and design by like that is a great idea. It's going to come down to the expense. I mean, can you do that in a way and still be profitable? And I obviously don't know her business model. But if you can, I think it's got really some serious legs behind it. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
And as you know, like the cost of acquiring customers now is the greatest expense. So especially as people look at this D2C model instead of opening stores. I still believe in stores. I still think that stores will always be there. I think people like that experience, but I think you can't ignore that D2C is here to stay.
I guess that would sort of lead into the role that technology has played in your, different job experiences. And, you talked about sort of like what was happening at eBay at the time that you were working there, and the transitions that have occurred, or going to Ron Herman and launching, a website for Ron Herman. I guess, how has your e-commerce site, social media, factored into the Fred Segal business, and what sort of technology innovations are you thinking about right now? Like this is for example, like with Rebag, they launched Claire, which is supposed to be like the Kelly Blue Book of handbags, and now you can go online and get a quote for it. Not totally related to your business, but meaning, what are you looking at?
Well, we were really late to the game, admittedly. In fact, the 2 years that I worked for the private equity firm, we launched the website, we had it up and running. We didn't spend one penny on marketing. We really felt like that was, Fred Segal was an historic, iconic brand that to translate online was tough to do. It's all about, to us, Fred Segal was experiential. And it was a place to see and be seen and experience California cool. And we didn't feel like that translated online super well. In fact, there was no Fred Segal website until mid, 2015 or so. So we were very late to the game. We are still playing catch up. Like I said, acquiring customers is really challenging. It's really expensive. But I think it's critical. One of the things that we've done during quarantine, and our new owner is super passionate about, is something called Fred Segal Live, which is live shopping. So there's a platform out there. We use one called Talk Shop Live, but there's a few of them out there where you can even Instagram Live, and you can go out and sell to your customers live. I think it's got its challenges, but I know in China, that's like one of the number one ways that people shop, through WhatsApp. So it'll be interesting to see if that translates to America the same way. I read today in Women's Wear Daily that Nordstrom's planning on doing a little bit of this as well. So it'll be interesting to see how digital shopping plays out. And I also read today that Amazon's now officially the world's biggest retailer. They sold like, I think it was $4 billion last year, or 40 billion in apparel. So beating Walmart and Target. So, it's definitely something to, that's where the future's going. But I still stand by my thoughts that I don't think the stores are going away.
Yeah, I agree. So 3 different questions. I'm going to run through them and then you can pick which one you want to address first, because they kind of go in different directions. One is, what do you see as the long-term opportunities for Fred Segal internationally, particularly in Asia? One, which kind of just started to touch upon, what do you see the future of fashion and retail going? So you mentioned you still see the brick and mortar stores serve a purpose, and I agree with that. They have their place and function and their sense of discovery. And then the other one is, can you speak more on your efforts to diversify your partnerships, like how you plan on finding more partnerships with companies owned by women and people of color? So we can tackle that in whatever order you think makes the most sense.
Well, let me start with the opportunities in Asia, because I do think that that's our number one market we want to go after. So we are opening a store in Korea on March 26th. That's a licensed store through Hanwha Galleria, which is like sort of the premier department store there. Japan is our number one target market. We've had stores in Japan before. We need to find the right partner. Has to be the right partner there. We have a strategic partner we want to work with. We were weeks away from signing a deal. I would say days away from signing a deal before coronavirus. So that got put on hold. But Japan, huge affinity for the brand. And then obviously China. I mean, China, I think we're a couple of years away from that. But I do think that there's an appetite for the Fred Segal brand in China.
Yeah. But you would have a franchise partner in China?
I think they would all be licensed. I do. I think we'd license over there. I think it's so unique and specific to the brand.
Yeah.
I also think to license, we have to have a higher percentage of private label product.
Yeah.
I think it's harder to do that. And so we need to grow a little bit before we get there.
Yeah.
In terms of people of color and diversifying the vendors, when we took a pretty good look at this summer, what we learned from our buyers was that not only were they not looking at it, they didn't know. Like they would go into a showroom and be sold by the reps in the showroom, and they had no idea who the designers were. They didn't know what the designer behind, Zarina looks like. They have no idea who the actual designers were. So it was actually kind of humbling for them to actually admit that and say, like, listen, like we've been doing a terrible job. We're not asking. We're sold by reps in showrooms. Their contact is the rep.
Yeah, their relationship is with the wholesale representative. And it's like, if you have a good relationship with that person, then you're going to be wanting and understandably willing to look at what they're offering because they're great to work with. You have an established relationship. And so
they weren't going that one step beyond that. They were looking at like, I have a great relationship with this showroom. I carry 5 of these brands. I love this rep, but they didn't actually know like the story, and they knew the stories behind some of the brands, but not necessarily the people behind the brands. So we partnered with the Black and Fashion Council over the summer, and we did a contest that we sponsored to find the next find the next fashion designer that we wanted to partner with at Fred Segal. And we had several prizes. The grand prize was $10,000, and we are going to be featuring those designers in our store this spring and summer. So we're really proud that we did that. And the partnership with the Black and Fashion Council is going really well. We've committed to, a lot. We had to take a look at ourselves like most companies in the US, right? Yeah. And so we have fully committed to diverse hiring practices. We have a ton of women, but not nearly as many women of color as we wanted. Yeah. So we've been looking at that. Our last few hires, we've insisted on, really focusing on getting the best candidates to apply for the jobs that were in that, to get diverse candidates. And, it's something that we're working on. Our motto has always been love one another. It's a very peace, love, hold each other brand. We're open. And so I think it's kind of in our DNA. And we're down the process. We're journeying down the path too.
So I'm going to ask because, I'm on the PR and strategy side of things and own an agency, and you guys work with Autumn Communications. Yeah. You work with Autumn. And so one of my former employees, Brian, I don't know if you work with Brian Jackson.
I don't know. We have an all-female team on our
He's a McGuire Steel alum. He's lovely. We love him. And I've actually worked with them on collaborative partnerships with some of their beauty brands to my fashion clients. And so I think a lot of times, like, in the industry, like people talk a lot about marketing. They don't necessarily talk about PR. And since you have a great relationship with your public relations agency and you're happy with their service, you said, I'd love to hear more about how you collaborate with your agency on PR initiatives and what PR initiatives you think have been most successful and how that part functions in your business, because that's interesting to me. And I think it's a part that doesn't get talked about a lot, like there's a certain magic in PR. So it's like, if it's working and it just looks really good public facing and it's making things happen. But I think people don't really talk about the inner workings. So they don't understand how that functions as opposed to like paid advertising or when you're talking about customer acquisition.
They're totally different, right? Yes. So I will be super honest. We don't have an amazing ROI with PR, but I also don't know that you can measure PR with an ROI because for us, when we opened our store on Sunset, for example, we've been open 3 years now. We still have people think that we're in Santa Monica. That store has been closed for 5 years, right? So we needed to do PR to put the name out there and the information out there. We got billions of impressions from our PR firm to explain to people, to show people, to do events there. And so for us, the PR was just as much about branding and word of mouth and generating impressions as it was for conversion. when we launch a specific product line, for example, we launched sleepwear recently. We have a beautiful line of silk sleepwear, washable silk. And that was, we asked the PR firm for help with conversion. So we wanted clickable links. We wanted affiliates. We wanted things that would drive people to our homepage to actually purchase. And that's been interesting. First of all, they've done an amazing job about getting it out there. So all huge props to Autumn. Getting people to click and buy is another story. And that is always challenging. I think the conversion is easier with paid media. One thing we are playing with right now, and we've not found the right fit, is influencer strategy.
I was going to ask you about that next, and whether or not, does Autumn handle influencer strategy?
They do. And it's not, it feels very, I'm very torn on this because we are a celebrity brand. Our celebrity list is hundreds of people long.
Yeah.
We opened the doors on Sunset and they just came. Every A-list actor, every musician. And part of that is because we preserve their integrity. Yeah. And so when we talk about an influencer and paying influencers, it's hard to feel authentic with that.
Yeah.
That being said, that is the way that the world is going. This is the way that marketing is going. So we are dipping our toe in the water and trying it. We have found some that have worked pretty well.
Yeah.
We did a live shopping event with an influencer. That was fantastic. We sold tons of product. Yeah. And it wasn't one that I ever would have thought we would have sold stuff with. So, but we tried it. And then there's ones that I think are perfect fits for us and will sell nothing. So I think the influencer thing is very hit and miss.
Yeah.
And it can be very expensive, but
I mean, we don't
finding the right one.
Yeah, I think it's like, it's interesting to me because, you know, the influencer work that I do is not a lot of pay for play. It's all relationship driven because of the curation of my roster. So it's more like mutually.
Most influencers aren't pay for play. They're not like we don't pay.
Right. For no, I know. But like, if you want somebody, understandably, if you want an influencer partnership that includes, you know, specific product and for it to run at a specific time with a certain repetition, that is work. And I don't think that's disingenuous for it to be a paid program. It's just more about, you know, if you want to control the timing because it's tied to a sleepwear products launch and you want to showcase certain product, then that is a paid partnership to a certain extent. If you want the guarantee of it running in a certain time frame, in a certain capacity with a certain amount of tags and mentions, and it can be productive. I think with the influencer strategy, it always comes down to tailoring it to the brand or the client and really making sure that it makes sense for their business and who you're engaging with. But I do feel like there was a bit of influencer fatigue during the pandemic because the idea of like, you know, and you guys weren't really engaging in this, but like unboxings when like, you know, the world is in free fall, it's maybe not the same sort of like indulgent pleasure it is before the world, you know, is imploding on a global scale. But it'll be interesting to see how that develops with new platforms like Clubhouse and Dispo. Are you looking at those platforms as well? Are you mainly
not yet? But we're not generally first mover on that tech side. We are generally first mover on the brand side. We love to be like ahead of the curve. And actually we've done some really cool in-store tech things for sure. We haven't really worked on Clubhouse yet. TikTok feels a little young for our particular brand, but I think people will have a lot of success on that. Same with Snap. We did do a partnership with Snap in store. We're just dipping the toe into paid on Instagram. So for us, like I said, we're behind the ball on this a little bit. Mostly because up until a year ago, we'd never paid for one media impression in our lives. You know, everything was generated by our fan base. So, you know,
I mean, also people can burn through a lot of money very quickly on paid social without it having an effective strategy in place, and then sort of wake up and be like, wait, what happened? You know,
yes, that could happen.
So I think it's good to be intentional and a little bit cautious, and especially if your like earned media and your public relations strategy is generating great awareness, then you can sort of like utilize that to kind of hone in on.
But for a new brand, I think having a great PR firm is critical, like absolutely critical.
Yeah. I agree. But
if I was launching a brand, I would put just as much money into production as I would into marketing. You know?
No, I agree. I think there was a period in time when Instagram was really at its peak that people thought, oh, you just launch a brand and you just have an Instagram account and it all happens. And I think thankfully we've sort of like come down from that notion that like, because Instagram really at this point is a paid advertising vehicle and it's algorithm driven, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a social media or an Instagram strategy, but it's very hard to break through that, if you don't have other things happening. Okay, so we kind of talked a little bit about this, but said, what pivots did you make to digital platforms with COVID, if any? I guess, did you start offering via the website curbside pickup, or
of
what were you
course,
doing on the
curbside
website?
pickup. You could dial and have a live session, like a Zoom session with a stylist. We did home delivery. Oh, we partnered with Postmates. We're on Postmates now. So you can actually order Fred Segal on Postmates.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And then another question is, did you see a rise in the sale of comfort leisure categories during COVID?
Oh yeah. I mean, so there were months where like we could not pay somebody to buy a pair of jeans. Like it wouldn't happen. And so if you walk in our store right now, we have 2 brands of jeans in the store. We used to be a huge denim business. And like, that's just not where it is right now. It's all about, in fact, the best selling brand in January and February on our in our store is Juicy Couture. So we relaunched Juicy. They were the original, originally launched at Ron Herman and Fred Segal, and we relaunched Juicy for them in January, and maybe in December, and it's been like our #1 brand. Amazing. So it's all about the sweats.
Amazing. I'm just reskimming to make sure we covered everything. There were some questions about work-life balance, which I'm always like, what balance? What do you mean? But maybe you're doing a better job. But like people,
I'm not. It's been terrible. It's been really strong. It's been a real struggle, especially my husband works full time and has a really demanding job. And I always, when you read about a lot of these women who have like leaned in, a la Sheryl Sandberg, they've had really supportive spouses. And I think the most challenging thing for me is not that my spouse isn't supportive, because he is, but like he works more than I do, and he travels. So that has been really, really hard. He's not traveling through COVID, obviously. Right. But we have a good support network. We've always had, starting when my kids were like in kindergarten, we had a live-in au pair. Because I needed the flexibility. Like I couldn't just have somebody 9 to 5, because I could get a fire drill at 5 p.m. I also have always had super flexible policies with the people who work for me. So I'm not saying I've always been like work from home wherever, like I'm not into that. I do think that like there is a culture that's created in the office. Although this has obviously been shot through COVID. But I also believe like get your work done, and like we can, if you need to do something, you need to do something. So it's been really challenging. Today was the first day in 12 months and 4 days that my kids were both in school. So,
oh my gosh. So this is officially
the day. And then, no, because then we go on spring break for 2 weeks, and then they quarantine for 2 weeks, and they're not back in school again for 4 more weeks. So, I mean, we had one day today, and I looked at my au pair and I was like, the house is so quiet. So, I mean, it's been really a challenge. But even before quarantine, I always say to like the women who I mentor or my female friends, like, there's no work-life balance. It just is your life. Like, that's just how it is. And you do the best you can. And you honestly, like, the #1 thing I always think of is everybody's doing the best job they can. And like, I don't judge other people anymore. I don't judge other parents, the way when, everybody does the best job they can. Everybody's trying their hardest.
And I guess maybe as a final question, because I think we've kind of covered everything. What do you think, having gone, working from home because of the pandemic, what do you think is missed in that environment? And what did you sort of gain that maybe you didn't expect to see working from home? Because I think there's both been obviously positives and negatives from it.
Well, the positive was I definitely spent more time with my kids. I mean, we have dinner every single night now. And sometimes it's 5 minutes, but I mean, we probably only had dinner once or twice a week, because my kids had sports. They had things after school. That my kids are 11 and 14. So they had stuff going on.
They have robust lives. They have their own.
They were busy. I was busy. I had this after work. I had this. And so, but mostly like I was driving them to water polo. I was taking this one here, and like, we never had time to do that. Well, when everything's canceled and you're on work all day and people end their meetings at 6, like we had dinner every night at 6:30 and we still do. And so as things pick up, like I don't expect that to continually happen, but maybe we can have it a few nights a week. So that's been the positive for sure.
Yeah.
On the negative, like I do think that you lose the team congeniality and the camaraderie. We have a team meeting every Monday. And every Monday after I try, when we were done going around saying what everybody's doing, I try to just like have us hang out. And like, it just doesn't work that well.
Yeah.
We'll do icebreakers. We'll try to talk about like Harry and Meghan, and see how and talk about the gossip. But like, it's not the same as if you're just sitting around a table.
Have you had to onboard anybody? Because I think a lot about like, maybe it's more because I'm thinking like when you're training an entry level employee, like there's so many, if you're hiring somebody who's established in their career, it's sort of a different trajectory. But like when you're bringing on people that are new, it's not that it can't be done remotely, but there's some things that are just so much faster to show someone in person as they're happening and like involve them in. And so
we've done a pretty good job at that.
Yeah.
What's weird is like the woman who's running our digital, she started last July. I've never met her in person.
Yeah.
She lives in LA, but she's been staying at her parents' house. And like, we just never met in person, but I feel like I know her really well. We have a one-on-one every week. I'm in meetings with her all week long, but I definitely like, you just don't get the same sense of like camaraderie, but training them and onboarding hasn't been that hard. And I do think that when our offices reopen, we will not go back full time.
Okay. So what's your
we gave up our
reopening
corporate
plan?
office. We gave up our corporate office over the summer.
Okay.
And we're going to move into our new owner's office. And because of that location where it is, we will not be going in full time. It just doesn't work for everybody. And what we've shown is that a lot of our employees, they can work remotely successfully. So
okay. So you'll go back to some sort of part-time
hybrid, some type of hybrid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you feel like there's anything we didn't touch upon that you would want the audience to know?
No, I mean, not on my end. I'm happy to talk to anybody who has questions. And yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Suzanne and Mandy and anyone else from WashU, do you have any specific questions before we conclude, or do you feel like we covered it?
I don't have any. Thank you both.
Okay, well, there's to the attendees, if anyone else has a question, otherwise we'll wrap up. So I guess if you want to chime in, but I think we covered, but this is your opportunity if anyone else wants to chime in with any additional questions before we conclude.
Well, you're all so welcome. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, Allie. It was great to have you.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Megan.
Okay, bye.
Bye, everyone.